All right, welcome everyone to the January 2017 first webinar in 2017, first of 12, I guess. My name is Kevin Mosher. I'm a certified specialist in labor and employment law from the Minnesota State Bar Association, a partner up at Thompson Co's Minnesota office, and today I am going to talk to you about the Form I-9, which is a topic that surprisingly enough is near and dear to my heart. I have been speaking around the country for years and years on the Form I-9, and I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing, and I get really excited every time there's a new form, and like I say, it might be something I need to ask myself why I get so excited about it, but it is at least interesting how much consternation and how many difficulties we can have with a fairly basic form and a fairly basic concept that we've been dealing with since 1986. So today we are going to launch and talk about the new Form I-9 that is coming out this weekend. So Sunday, we're going to have to start. As of Sunday, we're going to have to start using it for all new hires. So we're going to talk about the form. I will talk about some just general concepts that are not new with this form. So the new form itself, just overall, it is not going to blow anybody's mind. It is similar in the number of changes to what we saw in 2013. Though in 2013, at least we saw the dawn of the two-page form, which was very, very exciting. So we've got a two-page form here again. So I will talk about the material changes that we need to know about for the new form I-9, and then I'll also talk about the just general concepts and questions and that sort of thing with the I-9 that are just recurring issues and problems and concerns that employers around the United States have. For those of you we have a pretty big crowd today, and so that's great. That's again a testament to how exciting the Form I-9 is to our lives. And so for those of you who might be new and not familiar with the webinars, on the right you should be able to see a box where you can type in some questions. You are welcome to do so. Normally I'd take some amount of time to review the questions quickly and to answer those that haven't already been answered through the seminar or the webinar. And so I'll do that again today. I know there are a lot of questions, just, again, having spoken on this topic dozens of times over the years. I know people have questions. There are nuances, and so you are welcome to type them in. If I can't, and I probably won't, but if I can't get to everything, I will follow up with a Q&A from those questions and send it out to everybody. For those of you who are on the HR Hotline program, this is being recorded, so it will be available on the web portal through the thompsonco.com website. And you are welcome to rewatch this presentation as well as all the other presentations from past years and future years online at your convenience. Okay, so we will talk about the new form. I'm not, I can't really ask for hands on this. Oh, I guess I could. There is a little hand raising type thing that you could all do. Anyway, there is a new form. It's been out since November, so we've all had some time to kind of digest it and look at it. I suspect a lot of you on this call have already implemented it and have been using the new form, which is fantastic. It's nice that the government now does that, where they give us the form and they allow us to use it. It used to be that they would just issue the form, give us a very short period of time to kind of transition to it, but then they would say something like, well, and if you have a big stock of I-9s in the bin, you can use those until you're done, which is just, it never made any sense, because you could technically be through an ICE audit, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, that enforces and audits businesses. on the I-9, they could fine you for that. And so what are you going to do? You're going to argue that, well, 2 years later, you're still whittling down your stock of old I-9s. Never made any sense. So now they give us 60 days, and that 60 days is up on Sunday, so it's up on the 22nd. And so the Saturday is the last day that you can use for new hires, the old I-9, and you should shred and recycle and whatever. The old I-9s, don't use them going forward because you could technically be fined and you're in violation, paperwork violation, for using the old out-of-date I-9s for all new hires after Sunday. So we'll talk about that. We'll go through the new changes, and then for at least half of this, we'll talk about some just general concepts with the Form I-9 and some difficult issues. So it'll be a little bit more substantive training. And I used to, I've done these seminars so much, and I did one like 3 or 4 hours, and still there were more, questions and questions to questions. So I'm going to try to jam as much as I possibly can into 1 hour. And I think it'll be valuable. I'm hoping. Okay, so brief overview for those of you who don't live and breathe the I-9 on a daily basis, or just a nice review anyway. So the I-9, generally, what is the I-9? The I-9 is the way that the government tells employers that you need to ensure that people who are working for you are authorized to work in the United States. They're not illegal workers. And I don't really care if you call it illegal or call it lack of authorization. I know that it gets like people care about that stuff. But the reality is, you as a business, anytime you're hiring an employee, not an independent contractor, but an employee, not a volunteer, an employee, somebody who's working for you, you need to ensure that they are authorized to work in the United States. And if you don't, you could get fined. And if you have a pattern and practice of it and you're purposely trying to violate the laws, technically you could go to jail. So it's important. There is no legal requirement that we all become ICE agents or CIA or FBI or anything like that, and we don't have to root out illegal workers and send them off to jail and kick them back over the border or whatever we want to do. We don't have to do that, but we do have the affirmative obligation that for all newly hired employees, we need to do this Form I-9, which confirms that we have checked the person's work authority papers and a few other things, but that we've confirmed that the documents that they presented to us look like the person can work in the United States. And if they look like they can work in the United States, and if we've fully filled out the I-9, then we really don't have a whole lot to worry about, because we're not purposefully violating immigration laws by hiring illegal workers, okay? And I say this, and a year from now, this type of webinar will probably be more on, because we've spoken about this over the years, but I suspect we're going to get into a world where there's a lot more, there are more raids, and there's more government enforcement on audits. So getting to know the I-9 is a pretty good idea right now, because I suspect more money and more priority will go into auditing businesses and enforcing immigration laws and finding businesses under the next upcoming presidential administration. I think they've basically said as much, but we'll see if they do it. I suspect they will. So the I-9. So what do we do? It's a 2-page form. That's it. It's only a 2-page form. The 3rd page talks about all the documents, right? So what do we do? Page 1 is section 1. So the first part is section 1, and on section 1, we get basic information about the employee, who is this employee? What is their immigration status? Are they a lawful permanent resident, or are they a U.S. citizen? We have the employee fill that out. And the employee has to fill that out by the end of the first day of work. And if they don't, then we're technically in violation of the rules. So the employee needs to fill out the top of the I-9. It's the first section, section 1. We don't fill that out for them. We should not be filling that out for them. They should be filling that out for themselves. That's how we do it. Then we get to section 2, and section 2 is the guts, the meat and potatoes of the I-9, and that is where we then take the I-9 and we say, fantastic, do you have any documents indicating your authorization to work Here, page 3 of the I-9 is a list of those documents, and it's list A, and then there's a combination of list B and C, and list A documents are documents that have pictures of the person, as well as documents that convey work authority. But those are only list A documents, so like a passport, for example. Picture, a good picture or a bad picture, it doesn't matter. If it's got a picture on it, it's unexpired, and a passport conveys that you're a U.S. citizen. U.S. citizens, surprisingly enough, get to work in the United States. Then we get to list B, or if you don't have a list A document, you could have a list B document. A list B document is just going to be a picture identification, like a driver's license. Just because you have a driver's license doesn't mean you can work in the United States. Anybody can get, or not anybody, but people can get driver's licenses, and those are issued by the state. So those don't convey work authority. So we need to get another document, a list B, in combination with a list C document, and a list C document would be a document that conveys work authority, like a U.S. birth certificate or like a Social Security card. If you have a clean Social Security card that doesn't say valid with DHS authorization or not valid for work, as long as it's like a typical U.S. citizen type of Social Security card, that conveys work authority, for example, or a U.S. birth certificate, for another example, and you can have the combination of a B and a C document. Your obligation as an employer is to ensure that you have either a list A document and that you physically have seen that document, you've touched it, you felt it, you've looked at it, and you've made sure that that person in front of you sitting right there who has just completed section 1, that person is the same person that is on this work authority document, like passport or Social Security card and driver's license combination. And then once you have that document, it's your obligation to then complete section 2 to write it down fully and to write all the information about the issuing authority and the the nature of the document and whether the document has an expiration date. And what's really cool is back in the day, we used to have to, in this tiny little space that there's nothing really there, we used to have to fill out fully these document names, but now in the instructions, the government actually gives us a chart where it says what abbreviations we can use. So I would encourage you to look through the instructions, which are now 15 pages. By the way, they've gone from 6 pages under the 2013 version of the I-9 to 15 pages, so it's worth reading. Those are just the instructions on how to fill this out. It's not the handbook, which is, I think, like 80 or 90 pages. And we can use those abbreviations, but we want to fully fill it out. And then on section 2, then we need to sign off that we have done all of this and that we are authorized by the company, that we are certifying under penalty of perjury that we have seen these documents, and on the company's behalf, we are certifying that these documents look good, they're unexpired, all the information has been conveyed, and this person has work authority in the United States. And that could be, it could be you in HR, it could be a manager, it could be somebody who works for the company, it could even be an agent, somebody you pay, like a notary or somebody like that, to do this for you, and then they become an agent of the company. And that's section 2. And then that's for the most part. And then section 3 is used, but not for everybody. Section 3 is for two types of situations. One, where the person has temporary work authority, like they're here on a visa or they're here on some sort of other temporary employment authorization, normally a visa, and that authorization is going to expire. And they notify you of that in section 1, and you're going to see it when you see the documents in section 2, and then there's an expiration date on that. That is telling you that the person cannot work past that date. They might be legal to work in the United States today, but if the expiration date on their visa is May 31st, then come June 1, they cannot work for you. They are not authorized to work in the United States. And so we need to docket that, and we need to re-verify that come June 1 that the person has shown to us an updated document indicating that they have work authority, continued work authority, so that they can keep coming in on June 1 and working for you. So we fill out section 3 to do that. And then we also fill out section 3 if somebody is rehired. So if somebody comes out and you still have the I-9 file, you haven't shredded it or burned it or done whatever you want to do with it, we can take we pull out the old I-9, and if that old I-9 is less than 3 years old, we then could look to see if the work authority is continuous and that sort of thing, and we can fill out Section 3 in the rehiring. And sometimes we have to look to see a new work authority card. Sometimes we don't. It just kind of depends on the circumstances. But that's how we complete Section 3. So there you go, top to bottom, very quick overview of the I-9. We've talked about the new stuff to look for, and we'll talk about that in a next slide in a little bit more, next couple slides in a little bit more detail. But the new form, we have to be using it for all new hires, not current employees. We're not going to have all current employees redo the I-9s. That would be illegal. So we don't want to do that. Discriminatory document abuse. So we're not gonna do that. We are going to only do this for newly hired employees or for employees that we need to complete Section 3. We have to use the Section 3 of the new I-9, and the new I-9 is available on the government website. We'll see pictures of it here, but you can pull the new I-9 if you haven't yet. You can pull the new I-9 at uscis.gov/I-9, uscis.gov/I-9, and on that you can find instructions and lots of really fun things. There's even an I-9 portal. So we are going to start using this new form, and again, for better or worse, there are no really big substantive core requirement changes with this new I-9. Okay. So going through these sections, we are going to, so let's just do another quick overview on a couple other points. So with section 1, again, the employee is responsible for completing that. There is a nuance that if you look at this Section 1, it asks for email, and it asks for social security number, and it asks for the telephone number. That is optional. You otherwise, as an employer, need to confirm that all that information in Section 1 is complete. However, telephone number, social security number, and address are optional. Now, the social security number is not optional if you're enrolled in E-Verify. So if you're enrolled in E-Verify, you have to get the social security number, but otherwise it's optional, as well as telephone and email address. If there are mistakes on Section 1, the employee has to be the one to make the change. You cannot make changes to Section 1. You can ask the employee to make the change. You can, beg and plead and, offer 25 cents or whatever you want to do to the employee. But if there are clear, obvious mistakes, misspellings, that sort of thing, it's up to the employee to change, and the employee needs to be the one to do that. There's also an area for preparers or translators. So if there's a third party that is assisting the employee with this, that section needs to be filled out by the preparer or the translator. Section 2, again, this is for the employer to be responsible. I've covered a bunch of this. Documents have to be current. You have to be looking at the hard copies. Now, there is an issue with receipts. There are a few circumstances where somebody can use a receipt. For example, if somebody has applied for a visa, so say I apply for visas for companies all the time, right? So let's just say they came in on an H-1B visa. They are going to get an approval notice from the government saying we're approving your visa. You can work in the United States on this visa. You can transfer status. That receipt, that's a receipt, right? It's not a hard copy document. That receipt is going to be good for 90 days while the employee applies for the new employment authorization document. And an employment authorization document is a list, Section 2 List A document, like a passport. So if you're here on a H-1B visa, or if you're here as an asylee or a refugee, you can get these employment authorization cards, these employment authorization documents, and those have pictures on them and they convey work authority. So they're List A documents. But until you have the physical card in hand, you could have a receipt, and that receipt's good for 90 days. After 90 days, if they still don't get the receipt and they don't get the physical card, and which happens all the time because the government's not super fast on turning around these applications, they're out of luck. I mean, they really can't. They can't work for you after the 90 days with the receipt. So, but on the I-9, if we do get a receipt, we can take it and we can write on the I-9, receipt received, and then just dock it out, 90 days, and hopefully they bring in the physical hard copy document within that 90-day period. It is imperative that the representative, whoever is reviewing the physical documents that confirm work authority in the work authorization in the United States, whoever is actually looking at that has to be the person for the company who signs and dates it. And a lot of times, I understand there might be multiple people in the line, but the person who sees, who touches, smells that document, that's got to be the person that signs the attestation for the company, confirming that this person seems to have work authority in the United States. If there are mistakes, just a tip for you, if there are mistakes, get a different color pen, line it out, just line it out. You don't have to black it out or anything that could, get ugly with the paper stock. Just cross it out, put in the right information, and then initial and date it. So whoever's making the change will be an employer representative for Section 2 or for Section 3 as well. Just line it out, initial, and date it if you're doing corrections following up on an audit. Section 3, covered this a little bit. One tip for you, because I see this routinely, permanent resident cards. Those are essentially the green card. So, colloquially we talk about those as the green card. Permanent resident cards, you do not need to re-verify those. Those are issued in 10-year increments, and I get it. So those are good for 10 years. They've got expiration dates, just like passports. Passports have expiration dates too. But permanent resident cards, just like U.S. passports, indicating somebody's a U.S. citizen, we do not need to re-verify those, even though they have expiration dates. We don't need to. In fact, we should not be re-verifying anybody who's like a U.S. citizen just because their driver's license or their passport once somebody, as long as a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, a green card holder, once they conveyed that they had work authority on the first day of working for you, if they had work authority on that first day, you never need to re-verify, ask them for newly updated documents. And in fact, it's unlawful for you to do that. So I recommend that you don't do it. It is only for people who really have temporary work authority in the United States. And people who are on green cards don't have temporary work authority. People who are U.S. citizens don't have temporary work authority. Only people who are here on like short-term visas really have temporary work authority, and there are going to be some other examples. People who are asylees or refugees, they have, and this gets confusing, I get it, but people who are asylees and refugees, while they are given employment authorization cards that are issued in like 2 or 3 year increments often, those people, we don't need to re-verify them as well because their authority comes different and it gets confusing, but for whatever, we don't need to re-verify them even though they have temporary work. It's seemingly they have temporary work authority as well. So if they're an asylee or a refugee, we don't really need to worry about their continued work authority either. Okay, let's jump to the new stuff. I think we have a good basis for the I-9. So section 1, we've got new instructions, slightly new instructions. We've got a QR code, and we've got boxes to mark for the preparer and the translator. And let me show you what these are. Very slight changes. If you see in the upper right corner where it says other last names used, again, not material, but they did change that language slightly. It was previously other names used. So now it's just other last names used. Okay, so if there's another last name used, you're going to want to put it. You'll want to instruct the employee because you're not going to be filling out section 1, right? So here's section 1. This whole page here blown up. We aren't seeing any changes to the boxes. Those boxes continue to be confusing because people don't understand the difference between a lawful permanent resident and an alien authorized to work. But a lawful permanent resident is somebody on a green card. U.S. citizen, kind of self-explanatory. Non-citizen national, that's somebody from like an occupied territory. And yes, the U.S. has occupied territories from back in the day. So a non-citizen U.S. national would fill in that. Lawful permanent resident, nice way of saying somebody on a green card, somebody's going to show you a permanent resident card. And then the alien authorized to work, that's where we want to get some information. These are the people who tend to have they really have temporary work authority, but some of them, the ones who are in asylum or who are refugees, they're going to want to complete, and they're going to want to do the NA in the expiration date field. Now, if somebody who's an asylee or a refugee still puts down a date that says that their work authority is going to expire on a certain date, you can go and do section 3. If you don't know that they're an asylee or a refugee, you could go and do section 3, just like ticker it and docket it and go and do it before that work authority expires to ensure that they can continue to work for you. But otherwise, asylees and refugees only need to put NA. But the employee, and sometimes the employee, they fill in the wrong box. Like they'll say, hey, yeah, I'm a citizen, and then they'll give you a green card. Like it doesn't make any sense. So hopefully that's a situation where you would go and tell them, like, this doesn't make any sense. I think you're a lawful permanent resident, and you would ask them to make the change. The QR code on the right, this is going to be information. This is primarily, so they've added these QR codes, and we'll talk about the major change, which is to make this form a smart form. So all this form now, historically we've done this with fillable forms, but historically we've done this with paper. But now you can download, if you've got the right Adobe software loaded, you can download a fillable form that we'll talk about in a minute, and that will help you not make mistakes and that sort of thing. And the downloadable form that will produce a QR code that or the QR code would, be put in by the government. Okay, and then there's a signature for the employee. We always, that's always something employees forget to sign and date. That's a common error. And then the other change is that the preparer or translator, we now have to direct the employee to check the box. So this is new. There are more boxes to check. So we want to make sure that if they didn't use a preparer or translator, we want to ensure as employers, because we have to ensure that Section 1 is complete. That's our obligation, even though we're not touching it. We have to ensure it. And we need to ensure that if they didn't use a preparer or translator, that they have marked that box. Okay, so that's part of your new protocol. Make sure that that box is marked. And if a preparer or translator is, we want to mark the other box and ensure that the preparer or the translator has fully completed the attestation at the bottom. So there you go. There's the new really cool thing beside the smart form that we'll talk about in a minute for Section 1. Section 2. We have minor changes to Section 2, substantively nothing, no changes, and there are no changes to the documents, so no new documents that we need to familiarize ourselves. More QR code, additional information box, which is exciting, very exciting for those of us who audit, and hopefully those of us who audit our I-9s is everybody on this call. If not, a year from now when we're talking about these issues and we're talking about audits and how to do audits and the fines and stuff like that, hopefully everybody on this call, will have done an audit in the meantime. And then we've got some slightly different verbiage. Okay. New. One of the big problems when I'm auditing I-9s for companies is this is very common, so, no shame. But you see at the top where it says that the employee info from Section 1, you see where that is at the top? So often employers fail to fill that out. And I'm not saying like the world's going to end or anything because you fail to fill that out, but you are supposed to fill it out, and it technically is a violation, a paperwork violation of the I-9 to not fill it out. So, pay attention to that, because I would say I see these often. Really, really often, way more common than it should be. But I know they added it, just a few years ago, so it's, people are still getting accustomed to it. But and then they've changed a little bit. They've they've added the citizenship immigration status. So please make sure when you're doing the I-9 that you're filling out, you're carrying over the information from Section 1 and you're filling out the top of the I-9. I'm really excited about this additional information box. We now, rather than writing on the sides of the I-9 and doing all this crazy stuff, and I mean, some of the I-9s that I end up making them look, ridiculous with all the markings and everything. We now have an additional information box. So we actually have a space. We have a space to make changes, to talk about things. Maybe there are some nuances. You just never know. We could even put in there, like in that additional information box, like when we last audited this I-9, put audited date. It's great. ICE agents love to see that we are, on our own, periodically auditing our I-9s. They like that. It shows compliance. So even if we've messed them all up, it shows that we are trying to do the best we can with these. And so this additional information box, small change, very exciting as far as I can tell. The other thing, the big thing to do is there's the certification toward the bottom that I was talking about. Need to make sure that that is fully filled out. So often, we just see a signature and no date, or a signature and a title, and then the rest is just not filled out. You can't do that. I mean, it's got to be filled out. You cannot use a stamp to fill it out. It cannot be electronically signed. You can use, autofill the information, but you cannot electronically sign the authorized representative area. That's section 2. Here is a list of the documents that are acceptable for section 2. I was talking earlier about list A, or the combination of list B and list C. This is what I was talking about. None of this has changed. So this is going to be a carryover from what we've been doing since 2013, and most of these documents preceded 2013. So there's not a ton, there's no change here. I do recommend as a good business practice that because we don't want to tell employees, we never want to tell employees, hey, just bring in a driver's license and a social security card, right? We don't want to do that. That's document abuse. So we want to make sure that employees or prospective employees, newly hired employees, that they understand that they have, a platter of documents that they could bring in, right? So they could bring in a list A document, or they could bring in a combination of a B and a C document. And so just giving them, with the I-9, giving this form to them and saying, here are all the documents, you can do either A or a combination of B and C. Just giving that to them, that's best practice. So not verbally telling them, giving it to them, having them, take it, bring in the documents. They get 3 days. They get 3 work days, business days, 2 not work days, business days, 3 business days to bring in these documents to establish work authority. So that they might not have it with them on their first day, but they can bring it in the second or the third day, so that you can fill it out. So anyway, best practice, just give this to them. Take a lot of problems off your plate. Section 3, no changes. How easy is that? It's going to continue to be confusing, but there are no changes. Here's what it's going to look like. This is at section 3. So like I said, it's for re-verification and for rehiring. Okay, before I jump to this, I see there are a lot of questions. Let me see if I can. Okay, I see there are a lot of questions. Let me see if I can get to them, and then we'll talk about the SMART documents really quickly. Can an employee be placed on leave if he or she has not received the employment authorization document by the 90th day? And the answer is absolutely. You could put the person on unpaid leave, on unpaid status. You could, keep them on unpaid status. The key is that they don't, quote, work for you. As long as they're not, quote, working, then you're not in violation of the prohibition of employing individuals without work authority. So yes, you could keep them, on the payroll, just as long as they're not working. You could also fire them, and and move on if you wanted to. Assuming you're not doing it, because suddenly they're like, getting unions all excited and stuff like that to come in. So we want to, always a caveat. We always want to watch out for retaliation, discrimination issues, but you can certainly have a practice of just putting them on unpaid leave status. Does the same representative who verifies a new employee's information initially also have to verify rehires and or permanent documents if the new employee originally turns in a receipt? And the answer is no. You can have different people doing different parts of the I-9, and the rehiring, the re-verification, I mean, that could be years later, and so it certainly does. And the initial person who hired and did Section 2 and looked at all the documents, that person could be long gone. So the key is that if you're filling out Section 3, and if it's a situation on a re-verification or a rehiring where the work authority has expired, and you're doing Section 3, then the key is that you see that person who is signing off on Section 3, whenever it's done, that person has seen the new documents. It doesn't have to be the previous person. If the employee gets married and has a name change, does the employer need to re-verify Section 3 with new documents? And that's a really good question. I get that often, and the answer is no. You do not need to do Section 3 for people who get married and change their name. Could you? Yes. I would not ask. I wouldn't ask to see new documentation on it per se, but if you wanted to, it's not a bad practice to complete Section 3 with the new name. It kind of keeps everything a little bit cleaner because if ICE comes in and they're doing an audit on you, they're going to ask you for your payroll. They're going to ask for payroll periods, and then they're going to ask for the I-9s, and it just might, you might have to explain like, oh, Sally so-and-so was Sally whatever before, but now she's Sally so-and-so because she got married. Okay, well, it's an easy explanation. But your I-9 might not reflect it because Sally was Sally whatever when she initially started working for you, and now she's Sally so-and-so on your payroll, and so it's not matching up, and it might look like you don't have an I-9 for. So you could do Section 3, or you could just explain it if you're audited, or hopefully you're never audited. But you could always just explain it, but you don't have to. Somebody else asked the same question. If we've discovered we missed putting the name at the top of the second page, can we add it? Yes. So if you have failed to do that on the second page, carried over, like so many I-9s that I see are missing, yes, you could add it. You could date and initial it. I mean, anytime after the fact, yes, you should. So let's just put it this way. Yes, you should date and initial it. It shows compliance and that you're being honest. Because technically this I-9, Section 1 and 2 need to be completed fully, Section 1 by the end of the first day, Section 2 by the end of the third business day, and they need to be completed fully. So technically they're not completed fully, so you're completing it after the fact. So just to be honest about it, I'd be surprised if you ever got a fine. I don't think that's probably going to be a finable offense, especially if you've completed it afterward, even though it is technically a paperwork violation. So yes, I would any changes that you make after the time frame, I would initial and date. Is it okay to complete a new Form I-9 for a rehire if it's been less than 3 years? And the answer is yes. Now, if it's been more than 3 years since the last or the initial I-9 was completed, so if you complete an I-9 today is what, the 19th, 2017, if the person leaves and you still have that I-9 file, because you have to have the I-9 file for 3 years, right? A minimum of 3 years. But if the person leaves and they then come back, and they come back on January 20th, 2020, well, you have to do a new I-9 because the I-9, the initial I-9's, 3 years and a day old. So you have to do a new I-9. But if it's less than 3 years old, you don't have to do a new I-9. You just have to do Section 3 for on the old I-9, although you have to use Section 3 of the new I-9 because we have a new form, so you would use Section 3 of a new I-9, you could just staple it to the old one. You don't have to do the full I-9. But yes, if you have a practice, you don't have to, but if you have a practice of doing an entire new form I-9, could you? The answer is yes, you could if that's your practice, though you don't have to. Must you use different color ink when, these are really great questions, by the way. So must you use different color ink when making corrections before or after an internal audit? And the answer is you don't have to, but it's a good practice. And I recommend it, and I personally do it. Is it different if you catch the mistake at the onset to filling out the I-9? I don't know if I entirely understand the question. Is it different if you catch the mistake at the onset of filling out the I-9? I'm sorry, I'm not entirely tracking with what's intended. Okay, there are a lot of questions. Thank you for all the questions. I'm going to have to, let me see how far I can get through the presentation to make sure I do. So let's move, and I'll hopefully get back to some of these questions. Let's move on to the big change. It's not a substantive change to the form and the documents or anything like that, but the one change that a lot of you might want to implement going forward is that, you know, it took forever. It's 2017, right? But they finally have a nice, quote, smart, about as smart as immigration can get, form I-9. So you could go, again, if you have the correct you know, computer type stuff, you could go on that uscis.gov/I-9 website, and there's a fillable form that you can go on there, and it's nice, and the nice thing is it's interactive, and so if you fill out something incomplete, like a lot of the software, if a lot of you are doing E-Verify, or if you're doing electronic storage of the I-9s, you might already be doing some of this, you know, through software created by those agencies. But you know, so now we have a free form, and it's and you definitely, you know, could use it. It's new, so we'll I'm sure bugs will be worked out of it. But it's fillable, it's interactive, drop downs. It will auto-populate NA if you haven't filled out something. I mean, it should be helpful. It's not going to fix everything, but I think it's, you know, it's not dummy-proof. So stupid-proof, there it is, yeah, stupid. It's not stupid-proof, but I think it'll help you. And it should especially be good if you have, you know, people who aren't, you know, a lot of companies are having I-9s completed by, you know, managers and assistant managers at, you know, restaurants around the country, and they're not centralized. The I-9 process isn't centralized, mainly because HR people might be at corporate and they can't physically look at the documents, right? So they're relying on assistant managers and people who just really, you know, unless they're on this call, right? But they're probably not, you know, they're not HR people, and so they dabble. It's not why they were hired necessarily. They're not going to be I-9 experts. This new fillable smart form should help to minimize and cut down on errors in the completing process from those people. So I would recommend, especially for those of you who have businesses where you're having non-HR people or non-highly trained people on these issues, complete the I-9 and work through the I-9. I would recommend looking into this as an option for you. This is where the government's going. You still need to print it out. You know, it's still going to need to be printed. It can't be e-signed. And it's going to still need to be printed out and signed by people, and you're still going to need to retain it. You know, you can't just save it on your computer. You still need to retain a paper copy of it, or microfiche or microfilm, or if you're complying with the electronic storage regulations, you could probably, if you know, by having some sort of software, you could continue to do that. But this is not going to be a storage option for you. This is just going to be a completion option to make it a little bit better. Okay, let me run through some questions that I just put out there, and some of them I think we might have already talked about, but let's just run through these, and then I think I can get back to your questions after we talk about penalties very quickly. Do I need to have an I-9 on file for all employees? Yes, absolutely. If they're an employee, you need to have a file. If they've been grandfathered in, and they've been working for 30 years, over 30 years now for you, probably not many people left, but there could be out there. You don't need to have an I-9 on file if they've been working for you since before November 6, 1986 without break. If they've been rehired, you do have to have an I-9, but otherwise you don't. Can I have people complete the I-9? Can I have people, when can I have people complete the I-9? After an offer of employment. You definitely do not want to have an employee complete the I-9 before, like at the interview or before the interview. It is a condition of employment that the person complete and turn in the I-9 and verify authorization. We don't talk about it being a conditional offer of employment, but technically it is. But it has to be post offer of employment. Could it be, say you're a staffing agency, and you're, people are coming in and you're technically offering employment, but you want to get these I-9s on file, but you're offering employment, but you just don't have something for them right away, and that person might linger for weeks or maybe even months. Could you do the I-9 at that point? And the answer is yes. You could do, after you've offered employment, put them in the books, you could have the I-9 on file for them, even though they might technically not start working for days or weeks or even months. Could you, can you store the I-9 in employee files? And the answer is yes. And a lot of people call me and they say, Kevin, that's, somebody told me you can't put the I-9 in an employee file, and that's not right. You can put the I-9 in an employee file. Is it a good idea? No, I wouldn't do that. I would recommend keeping I-9 separately, and the reason is because ICE can come in and audit you and give you 3 days notice, and you want to have the I-9s to pull out and be ready for an audit. And how are you realistically going to, especially if you're a company of any real size, how are you realistically going to periodically audit the I-9s if you're pulling them out of employee files? It doesn't make any sense, but legally, yes, you could put them in employee files if you wanted to. Can you store the I-9 electronically? Yes, but only if you're complying with the regulations. The regulations came out years ago, off the top of my head, 2004, 2006. Well, anyway, they've been out there for a while. Normally, people use a third-party vendor software to do it, but yes, you can store electronically, but only if you're complying with those I-9 regulations. Can you include the I-9 with the application? Yes, you can include it with the application, but you should not have the person be filling it out and returning it to you. They can fill it out, but you don't want it until after you've made an offer of employment. You're not going to actually do Section 2 and review the documents until after you've made an offer of employment. Do you have to have an I-9 for somebody who only works 1 or 2 days? You've got 3 days to do Section 2 to show the work authority documents. And the answer is yes. If the person works for you for 1 or 2 days, you still need to, you're hiring them for a day. They're going to be, a day worker. You still need to have them have an I-9 on file for them. And in fact, if you're hiring them specifically for just like 1 day, you technically don't get the 3 days to complete Section 2. You have to complete Section 2 by the end of the first day. So no nuance, but for a short time hire, for like a 1 or 2 days, you don't get the full 3 days. If it's a 2-day hire, you got to have it done by the end of the second day. Now, if somebody comes and they just spontaneously, I hate this place, and they just blow out of there, well, you didn't know that, and that's, you're not going to be fined, or shouldn't be fined by the government because you didn't get an I-9 on, because you didn't foresee the person, leaving after a day when you were intending to hire them for a longer period of time. And that's the answer to the second one. Just make a note of it on the I-9 and say, look, person disappeared. We couldn't get the information. They worked less than 3 days. We didn't expect that. How long do you need to retain the I-9? Here's the rule. Ladder of 3 years, 3 years or 1 year after termination. Okay, but here's the way to think about it. If the person works for you for less than 2 years, keep it for 3 years from the date of hire. So less than 2 years, if they work for you for less than 2 years, keep it 3 days from the date of hire. If they work for you for more than 2 years, keep it for 1 day after 1 year after termination. So more than 2 years work for you, 1 year after their last day of work, you can shred the I-9. You have to retain it for that long. Day after 1 year goes by, you can go ahead and shred it. Do you need to use the new electronic I-9, the fillable smart form? No, you do not. Can you verify employment authorization documents with copies? No, they have to be physical documents. You have to feel the paper. If you ever see one of those metal Social Security cards, I have, they are not real. They are not real documents. They are something that people used to buy back in the 70s because paper Social Security cards are flimsy and are easily lost. In fact, I was looking for mine the other day, and I think I lost. I can't find it. So I think I need to get my own receipt. So lost or stolen, I can get a receipt, I guess, if not that if I need it for whatever reason. So what about via webcast or a video conference? Where you're actually seeing it through the no. You've got to touch it. You've got to touch it. You've got to feel it. You've got to smell it. You got to see what type of card stock it's on. There are a lot of fake documents out there. FYI. If you've never heard, there are a lot of illegal workers, and so a lot of legal workers are, it's not the employer's fault that they're being shown counterfeit documents. There are a lot of counterfeit documents out there, and they're not all that expensive to buy. So, I mean, you can go and buy a counterfeit document here in Minneapolis, pretty cheaply. I suspect in pretty much every major metropolitan area, it's pretty cheap to get a fake Social Security card. You pay more if you get a really good stolen one, but for just a fake, crappy one that's not tied to an actual person and their name, it's really not that expensive to get a hold of. Can I use a non-employee to complete Section 2? So you're doing like the authorized agent? And the answer is yes. Yes, it does not have to be an employee who is completing Section 2 for you. They just have to be an authorized agent. Whether you pay them or not, they just have to be authorized by the company. Can you request that newly hired employees provide Social Security card for Section 2? And the answer is no. You cannot do that. That would be directing somebody potential document abuse. You need to give them the option of which documents to present for Section 2, either a List A document from the list or a combination of a B and a C document. With that documents expired, ask them for another one. Can't take expired documents. What if the employee gives you a receipt? So in that situation we talked about before, you can take it depending on the circumstances of why that receipt was issued. And by the way, an application for a new employment authorization document is not a valid receipt. That's the most common one that you might see. A lot of times people will forget, or they just want to save a few $100 and they won't apply for a new employment authorization card. And the application for that card, and it takes like easily 12 to 14 weeks to get those cards. And but the application for that card is not a receipt. And so if somebody's working for you and they're a good employee and they say, oh yeah, and you say, well, hey, do you have any, your card's coming due here. I see your work authority is about to expire on February 1. Do you have anything? And they say, yeah, I forgot. I just applied for my new authorization card, my new work authorization card. And they show you a receipt to the Department of Homeland Security saying, this person has applied for the card and here's the receipt number. That's not a receipt. That's an application for a renewed card. The receipt can only be for like a lost or stolen card. Like me, I think I lost my Social Security card. Why do that's a lost one. If I go over to the Social Security, building and wait in line forever and I'll get a receipt, I can use that receipt because I lost it. But if it's an application for an employment authorization card, that's not a receipt. And unfortunately, a lot of those people end up on unpaid leave status. Do I have to complete Section 3 for a name change? And the answer is no. We talked about that before. What if the driver's license expires, or any document? What if it expires 1 day after the new employee begins work? There's nothing to do. That's totally fine. It's as long as it's valid on the day, it's unexpired on the day that you're doing Section 2, you're good. Doesn't matter that it expires the next day. You don't have to re-verify them. What types of work authority expire? And we've talked about employment authorization cards. Let's skip ahead. I want to talk about penalties really fast, and then I can see from all the questions that I'm going to have to follow up with and send written answers to everybody, which is probably more useful anyway to people. So thank you for those questions. Fairly new. In the fall, we were notified of new penalties. So switching off the I-9 really quick, we're going to talk about penalties. So these penalties are for employment of illegal workers and for I-9 violations. So I bring this up because these penalties have almost doubled with the new thing, and I would not be terribly surprised if the next administration increases these penalties even further. Now, first-time offenders are going to be toward the left-hand side. So if you're a first-time offender knowingly hiring an illegal worker, not accidentally, you don't get fined for accidentally, but for knowingly doing it, first-time offenders, the fines start at $539. For third-time offenders, they go up to $21,536 for each illegal worker hired. And so it can get pretty expensive. And if you have a pattern in practice, you can see at the bottom, you actually could go to jail for 6 months. So I bring this up. I just want to show everybody the new fines because they've almost doubled in the last few months. And it might not be a big deal now, but I can tell you when conducting audits for clients and dealing with ICE, these fines can get really heavy really fast. Depending on how many employees you have, it's really easy to make mistakes and to get fined, and these fines can be in the tens of thousands very quickly for small mid-sized businesses. Very, very routine. So I just heads up on that. I have 3 minutes. Let me, rather than going through my questions and my, I'm just going to put it here for people to read that just because I was so excited, and I, of course, had to make fun of the Cowboys at some level. So, okay, let me read through, we've got a few minutes, so let me read through some questions that were asked. If we've discovered that we missed putting the name at the top of the second page, yes. Yes, you can add that. If you do periodically audit, what can you do when you find a violation? So if you find a violation, if it's correctable, then you should put a line through it and make the change. If something's missing and the employee is gone, just hope that you don't get audited. I mean, you're doing the best you can. When you do audit notes, you should do some sort of audit recap memo. You might want to identify those employees. The reality is with a lot of these mistakes, they've got to be done in the first day and by the end of the third day, and so there's nothing to we fix it, but really what we're trying to do is mitigate. We're trying to show immigration that, look, in good faith, we did this and we have corrected it, but sorry. So if something's missing, now if the employee is still working for you and they failed to, you failed to either record or they failed to show you a list A or a combination list B and C document, then I would for sure go to that employee and fill it out after the fact. You could be potentially fined for it, but at least you're mitigating, right? At least you're going to mitigate it and you're going to kind of fall on your sword with that. If the employee is gone, they're no longer working for it, then just count down the days until you can shred that I-9 legally and hope that you don't get audited. Do a memo, show that you've noticed this, you see it, and hopefully immigration, if they do audit you, they don't get too excited about it. One more, and then is it okay to complete a new Form I-9 for rehire if it's been less than 3 years? I think I was asked that. Let's see. Okay, last one. If I had an employee complete his I-9, but he returned only page 1, so section 1 of it, do I give him a copy of the new I-9 to complete section 2 and Section 3. Currently, this is part of an audit. If I had an I-9, an employee complete his I-9, but he returned only page 1. So, I mean, it's your responsibility to ensure that Section 2 and 3 are complete. If you don't have Section 2 or 3 and you're doing an audit, then you definitely have to go to that employee and get the new section. And again, I would, you're going to date, you're going to put the date that you're actually looking at those documents. You're not going to backdate it. So could you be fined? Yes. Hopefully you won't. At least you're doing the best you can with it. But yes, you absolutely have to have a fully completed Section 1 and 2 and potentially 3 if that's relevant, Form I-9 on file for your employees. Thank you for all the questions. Next month, we are going to prognosticate a little bit about what a Trump administration is going to do for HR. I'm really excited about that. Thank you for everything. I'll leave the questions open, so you're welcome to write them in, and I intend to take all the questions that were unanswered and send everybody copies. Thanks for your time and attention. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me directly with anything, and I will talk to you next month.